Hello and welcome back to another UCL fantasy video. Today we have another ultimate guide where we go through absolutely everything you need to know to prepare for the upcoming match day. We're on match day 15 now, and that means there is only 3 match days left until the end of the season, which means there's only going to be 2 more videos after this with the ultimate guides, and of course only 3 team selections before the end of the season. So today we've got our clean sheet odds, we've got our goal odds, we've got the projected draw, the players that you might want to look into buying, basically all the information that you are going to need for match day 15. Now, starting things off, we have got 5 transfers to use heading into the semi-finals, and a lot of us probably have quite a few transfers to make, quite a lot of eliminations, because the likes of Real Madrid, a lot of people brought some Real Madrid attackers in last week before they played against Arsenal, in the case that they scored a few goals, but they have now been eliminated. The same with Aston Villa, the potential for a comeback at home against PSG, they have all now been eliminated as well. So we've got 5 transfers. I don't think too many people should have more than 5 eliminations, unless you've went really hard on the likes of Real Madrid to make a comeback, which I don't think you probably would have done. But after this week, we do have 3 more transfers before the second leg of the semi-final, and then it's 5 transfers heading into the final. So it should be more than enough for your players. A couple of changes as well to the rules. We now are allowed 6 players from each team. Last match day it was 5, but now if you want to add in another PSG player, another Barcelona player, you can now have 6 of them, which is ideal. There's obviously a ton of PSG players that are looking really, really good. And of course with Barcelona, a lot of us have quite a lot of those guys as well. And the other change is that there's only going to be 1 match per game day, so there's only 2 matches of course each match day now. 1 will be on Tuesday and 1 will be on Wednesday, which means whichever captaincy choice you pick is just going to have to be from 1 match. So we've only got 1 match per day now going forward, which isn't the best thing in the world, but it is what it is. That's kind of what happens as we go towards the end of the season. And this is how the projected draw is looking heading into the semis, with all of these odds of course taken from Odds Checker. Again, as I always say, this isn't going to add up to 100%, it is just based on the odds of each team to qualify to the final. So PSG are actually the favourites to qualify against Arsenal, and of course it is Barcelona who are the favourites to go through against Inter. I think Barca are probably the more likely team, the more easier team to predict that will make it through to the final, but at least at this point, with the semis, you don't really have to worry too much about losing out on a lot of players when they get eliminated to the final, because obviously with the final the bench doesn't matter, so you can have 4 eliminated players on the bench if you like, because obviously it is a one-off match and the bench isn't going to matter. So no one really has an issue when it comes to the final with eliminated players. Usually the semi-finals is the hardest one to try and deal with, so I wouldn't really worry about splitting all of your players evenly between each of the teams. You could easily go with 6 players from whichever team you like, and if they get eliminated it's not going to be the end of the world, because you can just bench them all for the final. So nothing really too much to worry about at this point. It should be fairly easy to navigate. So if you have held a wild card or a limitless, you probably have been put at a slight disadvantage, because obviously there was no big upsets this season. But our projected final is going to be PSG and Barca, which at this point is kind of who everyone owns anyway. Everyone's got your Rafinhas, Lamals, Lewandowski, Szczesny. PSG, you've probably got Pacho, Marquinhos, Dembele. There's so many players, Hakimi and Mendes. So if this is going to be our final, again, like I said, everyone's pretty much going to have these same players anyway. We are pretty much past the point now of being able to climb a lot of rank. Last week I tried to go a little bit differential and managed to climb back up to 21,000, but at this point I think I've kind of got to just accept the fact that I'm not going to get a high rank this year, because everyone's basically got the same team, and there's not really anywhere that you can go that is going to be highly differential this season. So as far as injuries go, we don't really have too many at this point, which is pretty ideal. The only thing that is going to be a bit of an issue is going to be the forward lines, and I'll speak about that a little bit more in just a second. But this is our injury list for this week. in terms of like key injuries, we've had players out for months that we're not really going to worry too much about. Gabriel is still out for Arsenal. I think he is going to be out to the end of the season. He was a popular player throughout the entire competition, but he's of course going to still be missing. I've got Pavard down as a doubt. I just found out 5 minutes ago that he is going to be out for match day 15. He sprained his ankle over the weekend and was forced off quite early, and he is now missing the Barcelona game. So that is something that you do have to keep in mind. Me, myself, I own Pavard, so I'm going to have to take him out as well, because he is not going to be making the game against Barcelona. We've got Thuram, who has a doubt as well. He picked up an injury, I think about a week and a half ago, and he was looking very likely to be missing match day 15, but he did train individually today, and supposedly it went quite well, so he could still be in the squad or even in the starting 11 for Wednesday's match against Barca. So he is definitely a doubt, definitely one to keep an eye on. Obviously I post the team news, so make sure to follow me on Twitter, and we'll find out as much as possible before then. But he is going to be a doubt for this week, and he was going to be a lot of people's third striker alongside Lewandowski and Lautaro Martinez. We've also got Balde, who is also a doubt at left back for Barcelona. Again, another player that could make Wednesday. I think he has been training, he is fit enough, but Barcelona don't want to rush him back. Ideally this game comes a week later and he would definitely be in the starting 11, but it could be a little bit too close for him to start/play. So again, another one to keep an eye on out. And Lewandowski as well picked up an injury. He is likely to miss both legs, potentially just one leg, but likely to miss both legs against Inter Milan. So that's another striker that is going to be out. So at this point, Arsenal don't have any strikers available. The likes of Havertz is obviously out injured. Gabriel Jesus is out injured. Inter Milan, we've only got Lautaro Martinez in terms of starting strikers. So that leaves us with Lautaro and Taremi, who is probably going to be your front two for Wednesday if Thuram isn't fit. Barcelona, again, Lewandowski is the only striker, so he is also out for that match, leaving Barcelona with no strikers. And then we've got PSG, who again basically have no strikers. All of their players are midfielders, and the only striker available is Desiree Doué, who is only like 4.7 million, so a very, very cheap option. So that basically leaves us with the three players on screen, which is Lautaro Martinez, Taremi and Doué, which is probably going to be everyone's front three, unless you want to go for Thuram as well. And of course, if Thuram is fit, then you just put him in over Taremi, and at that point everyone still has the front three of Martinez, Doué and Thuram. So it's quite a difficult one. Like I said, very tough to go differential, especially when there's no available strikers. So at this point, I guess you could go with a triple up on the Inter Milan attack. Maybe you could go for Lautaro Martinez, pick Taremi and Thuram, and then you get whichever one comes off the bench. It's not ideal, but it does seem to be the only way to kind of maximise who you've got up front. So quite difficult, as I said, with the amount of injuries, but I would expect Lewandowski to be back for the final if they do make it through, so we could maybe see a little bit more differences there. So these are the fixtures for this week. As I said at the start, down to 2 fixtures now. On Tuesday we have Arsenal versus PSG with Arsenal at home, and Wednesday we have Barcelona versus Inter with Barcelona at home. Now obviously I changed this around last week, so we've got the chance of winning in matchday 15, determining how difficult the fixture can be. So our easiest fixture this week is going to be Barcelona. Again, the likes of Rafinha is probably going to be your captaincy on Wednesday, but if you do want to go differential, this is the time to do it. The captaincy is the place to do it. Inter are still a very strong defence, but they have been pretty poor in recent weeks. They haven't won a game in their last 3, so you could maybe go a little bit differential. Of course, with Lewandowski being out injured, that opens the door for Ferran Torres to start as striker, who is down as a midfielder, so a very decent opportunity to get him in and potentially do quite well if he is going to be a bit of a differential. And of course he could be a captaincy option as well if you want to go against Rafinha and Yamal, who are going to be the obvious captaincy choices. On Tuesday, Arsenal and PSG, the obvious pick again is probably going to be someone like Dembele, but you could maybe go Arsenal, who there's not really a lot of good Arsenal players in UCL fantasy. Obviously Saka is the obvious pick, potentially a Declan Rice if you wanted to go in there as well, with the chances of him scoring, maybe getting a few assists, but obviously man of the match awards as well, which has a big part at this stage of the season. But Arsenal don't really have too many good options. Obviously, with them having the home fixture too, maybe the best option is just going to be to go for someone who could get ball recoveries. So Declan Rice could be a decent option, for ball recoveries, player of the match, and then hope for an odd goal or assist in there. Or you just go for the high ceiling player away from home in PSG. Maybe you go for Hakimi, a Mendes in defence and hope they get an attack in return. Or maybe you go for like a ball recoveries player in Pacho or Marquinhos. Clean sheet odds this week are all fairly similar, with everyone around that 30% mark except for Inter Milan. So it looks like Inter are going to be the team to avoid this week, especially in defence, with Barcelona expected to score goals, obviously, as they do, and having that home fixture as well. But again, worthy keeping in mind that these clean sheet odds are still fairly low. We have seen teams above 50% and stuff, a lot of low clean sheet odds at this point of the season, and you are going to see less and less clean sheets, which is why it is useful picking defenders who do get a lot of ball recoveries, because then you've got another avenue to points that isn't just going to be reliant on clean sheets. So Barca are highest this week with 35%, Arsenal in second with 33%, and PSG in third with 30%. So not too much to differentiate those three. At this point, you really just want to pick the defenders who are going to be, a high chance of attacking threat and high ball recoveries, because, the clean sheet odds really don't matter, I don't think, at this point of the season, because it is just, it feels just like a big gamble. No one's got a high chance of keeping a clean sheet, and if they do, it's just an added bonus. So ball recoveries are, your stable avenue to points at this stage of the season, so make sure you're picking up some of those guys. The goal odds, though, is a little bit different. We do have a fairly, big gap when it comes to over 2.5 goal odds, with Barcelona still quite high at the top with a 36% chance of over 2.5 goals. So it is the Barcelona attackers who are going to be favoured this week. So again, Ferran Torres, Rafinha, Lamine Yamal, all really good options. Arsenal in at second, 15% less, down at 21%. Again, your Sakas, maybe Martinelli and Odegaard, they're going to be big differentials. Trossard is going to be a huge differential if you do still have opportunities to try and gain rank in there. They're going to be the good options for this week, with a low chance of 2.5 or more goals is going to be PSG and Inter Milan. So obviously we spoke about having fit forwards. Do you really want to pick a front three of all Inter Milan strikers with Martinez, Taremi and Thuram when they only have an 11% chance of picking up 2.5 or more goals? It's one of those situations where you might just have to do it because everyone else is injured and you need fit players, but it might not go too well. I wouldn't really be expecting too much from that, especially in matchday 15 with the away fixture against Barcelona. PSG as well, who have been heavily invested in, Dembele, Kvaratskhelia, Doué, as we've already mentioned, Barcola. If you've got all four of those, maybe look to swap them round to another Barca or Arsenal player, because PSG only have that 13% chance of scoring 2.5 or more. So it's really going to be about, at this point of the season, just getting lucky with the player that does score. There's going to be low scoring games, 1-0, 2-0, and especially when there's only 2 matches per match day, you've really got to nail down who is going to get those goals, which again, as I keep mentioning, is why you've got to pick players that get ball recoveries and player of the match, because they are the extra avenues to points that doesn't just rely on goals and assists. So at this stage of the season, heading into the semis and the final, these are the 3 categories that I kind of like to look at for players. Obviously, you're going to have your attacking threat players, the players who are going to get goals, the players who are going to get assists, whether that's forwards, midfielders or defenders. Those are the ones that you're expecting for the big hauls. We've also got the ball recovery players, who are the ones who do get, obviously, ball recoveries. That's mainly going to be defenders. Defenders, as well as clean sheets, you're wanting to look for ball recoveries. 8-9 ball recoveries per match is 2, 3, 4 points extra every single game, which is of course equivalent to the likes of an assist, which is absolutely fine and more than capable of getting big scores still with those kind of players. And then we've got the player of the match awards players, the player of the match award magnets. We've seen this with a lot of midfielders who don't really rely on goals and assists, but obviously a good performance in these big matches can get them the player of the match award. We saw it with Kante during the Euros, who I think picked up 3 player of the matches in a row. It was something like the round of 16, the quarterfinals and the semis. He picked up the player of the match award in France's on all of France's games in the knockout stages. So we have kind of seen it with this already, with this season, with Pedri picking up 2 in a row. With the player of the match. Vitinha picked up 1 in that 7-1 win, I think, or 7-0 win for PSG. He only, I think, got a goal, but he still picked up the player of the match. And then, of course, Declan Rice obviously scored those 2 free kicks against Real Madrid, but after a really good performance, or, you know, a really solid defensive performance in the second leg of the quarterfinals against Madrid, he also picked up that player of the match award. So if you can pick up, you know, if you can find these players like Vitinha, who is also on penalties for PSG, if he picks up the player of the match award, it's obviously, you know, going to be a big haul from him. The same with Declan Rice. Obviously the added goals and assists is going to be brilliant, but it's just kind of trying to find those players out of the 11, because obviously all 11 of your players aren't going to return at this stage of the season. It's just basically impossible. So you do want to try find, you know, ball recoveries and player of the match awards, you know, as another way to get points. So ending off the video, we have our ball recovery players, and at this stage it's very much dominated by PSG, and there's not even that many, you know, good ball recovery players. Obviously we've got our top 10 of players who are still remaining in the competition, but there's a big difference. You know, we've got almost Pacho at the top with about a double the score of Gabriel at the bottom, you know, so there's a big difference between these kind of guys. Obviously we have played 14 match days so far. You know, Pacho, Marquinhos heavily at the top. They're going to be your 2 main players at 101 and 100. Mendes and Neves are doing quite well as well with 70, but it's when you start to get down to the Koundé, De Vrij, Gabriel, you know, at 56 and 55, that's not really that good a score, you know, when you consider that there's been 14 game weeks. I can whip out the calculator now and just work it out. So if we've got 56 divided by, you know, 14 game weeks is an average of 4 ball recoveries per game. So that's 1 extra point per match, which isn't really going to be ideal. So you really want to be looking, I think, probably like Saliba and higher at 63 and above. Saliba's not the best, you know, he's still probably got an average of about 5 per game, but, you know, it's like I said, it's mainly dominated by your PSG players, Pacho, Marquinhos. So if we look at Pacho as well, 101 divided by 14, that's going to be an average of 7.2, so you're looking at least 2 points extra per game. If he can get a little bit more than that, again with this away fixture to Arsenal, you would expect Arsenal to be in the front foot a lot more, where they could pick up, you know, a lot of ball recoveries. You could be looking at an extra 3 points for Marquinhos and Pacho. So a very, very low pool of players this time round. I think last year the ball recoveries were quite high. It was a lot of the Dortmund defenders and Schlotterbeck and Hummels that were doing quite well. This year there's not as many, but you're still getting quite a lot, you know, with a lot of the PSG players. But that is going to round it off for today's UCL guide. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like. My team selection video will be out later today. It is just going to come out in the evening. We'll have a double upload today. Again, as I said, make sure to, you know, keep an eye out on the rules. 6 players per team now, and only 1 match per day, of course, which is going to be interesting for our captaincy picks. Make sure to follow me over on Twitter if you don't already for any team news that does come out, and set notifications so you know when the video comes out later today for my team selection. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.